right?
Absolutely brutal. Yeah.
Hey, Brad, you're off with us. We're going back to a different time.
He's got, this is Jim Bates in the car.
You don't have to.
We have to leave early, Russian.
You guys do get off.
We
with
have more
breakfast.
important places.
We do. Breakfast on, you know, that.
Right out the
Yeah. Hello, Ryan. Here all good for you today.
I'm gonna lead a one law review session today, I think at 3:30. Just gonna cover everything we've learned so far.
Oh, wow. Just
So
that.
try to
Just everything. That wouldn't take me long.
well, basically means, you know, repackaging slides from the professor. And go through everything.
Okay.
So are you what you might call somewhere else a TA?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
A little bit of a farm background, it's tractor. TA is a torque amplifier.
PTO, that's another one.
Yeah, the power take live or dead. Live PTO is if you put the clutch in, it still rolls. The old ones were dead, you had to have the clutch engaged and stuff like that. And you're doing a failure or something like that, it's operating off the PTO, you have nothing. The live PTO is a real elevation.
Okay. I wonder if anybody's online. I'm gonna go online because we used to have more people joining online. When they submit comments, when people are reluctant to speak up, but they would type in a comment. And so I could kind of track and keep up with those, but anymore, nobody out there.
So are we leaving?
You tell me.
9:20, you guys are leaving? I'll finish class at 9:20. It's perfect.
Oh,
It's awesome. No, I'm serious. I'm not even, that's awesome. We're on welcome to class number 4 of St. Thomas Aquinas. Like I've been saying over and over and over again, forgive me. For those of you that keep up, shout out to Eli and Charlotte. If you guys are watching later, I don't know if you guys are, but if you are, Eli and Charlotte. I'm gonna keep saying the names Eli and Charlotte. People that watch this online or maybe listen, preferably in the car, because they prefer maple syrup history as their podcast of choice, I guess. Are we a podcast? We have like one viewer. I don't know if that's good enough to qualify or not. I see some skepticism in the crowd, but I don't know. I'm going to say yes. We can definitely finish at 9:20 because I'm just going to dive right in after this preamble that I'm currently doing now. And as people are arriving, welcome to everyone. We're just going to go straight up with the arrows that I made. Hello, Clay Zimmerman. Hello, Barb. Just going to go straight with the arrows that I made, and then we'll finish at 9:20. That's awesome. So without further ado, remember the question is perennial. Is what St. Thomas is saying plumber's logic? I say very much so. Yes, tonight we're going to have Spirit and Life, where I'm going to talk about the scholasticism in general and the scholastics, but really St. Thomas will dominate that discussion. And a point that I'm going to make that all of you are very familiar with in this class is that while St. Vincent Ferrer is actually the patron saint of plumbers, of the building trades, perhaps St. Thomas Aquinas should be. He is the most blue-collar kind of person. Even his most speculative pronouncements, his most speculative theology and philosophy ultimately is very common sense based, right? We're just going to follow the logic where it leads us. Let's dive right in. First question St. Thomas asks, and henceforth only St. Thomas, just assume for the next, 44 minutes till 9:20, it's all just St. Thomas. We're gonna be done at 9:20 because the Schmitz are leaving. So when they're done, class is over. Is conscience a power? Origen says that conscience is, quote, the correcting spirit and companion teacher of the soul, whereby the soul is dissociated from evil and inclines to good. Then he gives a couple of objections and he says, I answer that conscience, properly speaking, is an act, not a power. Do you agree with St. Thomas? Next 44 minutes, let's do this. Welcome everyone. Full class today. It's awesome. Oh, we're not going to talk about football. Are we talking about football? No, that's going to be point number 6.
Oh,
Today's class number 4. So actually, haha, but seriously, you're right. In our 6th section on St. Thomas, we'll do some kind of like question disputat, the kind of disputed argument, debate, objection, back and forth. And we'll talk about should football be banned? Or is it, are safety concerns so overwhelming, etc. Today, no, they were just reading straight from the Reagan on law, morality, and politics, which will most likely finish up next class. And then do something else. And then I don't know. Like I said before, I kind of almost wish I did more on St. Thomas. Is conscience an act or a power? What do you think?
Conscience or consciousness?
Not consciousness, like I am conscious, conscience, your conscience, the Jiminy Cricket, yeah.
yes, it is an act and not just a power, because if it were a power, then it could not be misled in and of itself. But it must be an act because it can be misformed and it can act on the wrong things and the right things. And we say that's a misformed conscience, and that's the case.
So let's talk about that today. We hear a lot, and I hate the term post-Vatican II church. There's the church, period, right? The Holy Bride of Christ. In this era and all the attendant, let's say, positives and problems and stuff, we often hear this problem of conscience, right? I need to follow my conscience no matter what. And that's often said, like when I'm doing blank that perhaps is morally objectionable or questionable, I'm going to follow my conscience. Do you agree with Ryan Alexander that the conscience is not infallible, it can be misformed? Or are we bound to follow our conscience no matter what? Is that acceptable? I'm doing blank because my conscience is convicting me to do that. I'm bound to follow that, as some kind of postmodern theologians might say. Or can we have misformed conscience? What is more plumber logic to you?
Just in the base definition. I'm just wondering, a conscience, can it be misformed?
What do you think? Can it be misformed or not?
I think it can, and I think that we are bound to properly. I feel like, if you believe abortion is good, well, that's not a good, well-formed conscience. And no way should you follow that.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as we're created in the image of God. Can, for example, believing in abortion, can that still be regarded as conscience? It seems like that doesn't, it's like an oxymoron to me, perhaps. I'm just wondering out loud.
I think it depends how we define conscience. Because you could, if you were to say, because I've heard multiple things, but you could just be what you, whatever, however you describe it, what feel at the bottom of your heart is good or bad. That could be one definition. Another could be like that small voice in the back of your head, which as a Catholic, we believe is like from God as to what is right or wrong. And in that case, a misformed conscience would then be an inability to hear that properly. Or taking it and then making it into my own, whatever, having my own, or inserting my own like plan of how that plays out, or not receiving properly what God's will is. So I think it depends, because in the first case, definitely it would be more of an act because you could have a misformed conscience and you could then do bad things thinking they were good things, which we talked about earlier, where like no, what was the thing we talked about earlier with like, and you do a truly evil deed? Is that what it was? With
We were saying that last class, the discussion was, does intent matter? Does intent matter? So like, okay, so I know what you're saying now. Last class was, does intent matter? Like, I build a hospital for the poor. Does it matter if it's done in the pure motive, like perfect contrition, perfect love for God and love neighbor? That did an analog to confession, perfect and imperfect contrition. Couple classes we talked about, like, yeah, some philosophers say, like Aristotle or Socrates, back to him, that no man desires evil. Everyone who does something evil still rationalizes, uses kind of a malformed conscience perhaps to say, actually what I'm doing is good. A great example, anyone ever read Crime and Punishment? I actually read Crime and Punishment. I'm reading it now. It's so good. Raskolnikov, the main character in there, rationalizes his act of killing this pawn shop broker and incidentally her sister Because, is not one death worth all the good I can do with her money? So you rationalize the most horrible thing in taking of an innocent life, obviously in that act, right? This barbaric thing, he also rationalizes theft under the level of Dostoevsky was so good at criticizing kind of Western materialist utopianism. Oh, but it's okay because I'll use all this money for a good, and of course his conscience eats him alive throughout the rest of the story. So, okay, so I think settled. Plummer's logic, court adjourned. I think it's like you can't have a malformed conscience. I think that seems pretty obvious. And perhaps it's incumbent upon the teachers in our faith. And doesn't, St. Paul's letter to Timothy say not all of you should be teachers, right? But have good catechists, Sunday school leaders, etc. Like God bless the Myers who do a great job, like the high school kids, have good people teaching kids stuff. In order to, especially in those formative years, form a proper understanding of right and wrong. The law. Does law belong to reason? Thomas asks. What do you think? And then I'll tell you his objections and his answers. Does law, L-A-W, does law belong to reason? No, thank you. Please always ask me for clarifications if I'm, mispronouncing or speaking too fast. I want everyone to always be on the same page. Thank you for that. Law, L-A-W. Does law belong to reason? What are your thoughts? So you're saying maybe not sometimes, maybe there's irrational laws. Okay, Brad, what do you think?
Well, your hope is reasonable and came from reasonable thought.
Okay.
I bet it wouldn't take you long to find some stuff.
Well, here's what St. Thomas says. He lists 3 objections. He says, the apostle in Romans 7:23 says, I perceive another law in my bodily members, etc. That's verbatim, that's not me. I love saying etc. I love that phrase, but this is actually here. Reading the thing. I'm not doing it. I perceive another law in my body members, etc. But nothing belonging to reason belongs to bodily members, since reason does not use bodily organs, therefore law does not belong to reason. Objection number 2, only power, habits, and acts belong to reason. But law is not the very power of reason. Likewise, law is not a habit of reason, since habits of reason are intellectual virtues, about which I have spoken before. Nor is law an act of reason, since law would cease when the lawmaker ceased to reason. Example, when he is sleeping. Therefore, law does not belong to reason. Objection 3. Law induces those subject to the law to act rightly, but inducing to act rightly belongs in the strict sense to the will. As is evident from what I have said before, therefore, law belongs to the will rather than to reason, as the jurist also says, quote, the pleasure of the ruler has the force of law, end quote. On the contrary, it belongs to law to command and forbid, but to command belongs to reason, as I have maintained before. Therefore, law belongs to reason. Now, before I answer that. I'm going to read you his whole answer. And for all these questions, we're not always going to read the whole thing, but this is his great scholastic style, right? Aquinas, Ryan Alexander, I had this discussion once about how like Catholics need to really hammer home that we can make atheists' arguments better than they can. That's very Thomistic, very scholastic of like. And here's why that's still not sufficient. Actually, if you want to doubt the existence of God, that's pathetic, that's stupid. Here's your logical fallacies. We can list all the ones we started the class with. Here's a better argument. It's still not good enough because of blank. And then you might actually win that person over intellectually because, oh, this person it's on good faith. They're not creating a straw man. They're actually showing me how to argue better. It's still insufficient though. St. Thomas answers verbatim. I'm reading you kind of a long paragraph. I'm sorry in advance. I answer that law is a rule, a measure of acts that induces persons to act or refrain from acting. For law is derived from binding, because law obliges persons to act. And the rule and measure of human acts is reason, which is the primary source of human acts, as is evident from what I said before. For it belongs to reason to order us to our end, which is the primary source regarding our prospective action, as the philosopher says. The philosopher always assumed Aristotle, right? And the source in any kind of thing is the measure and rule of that thing. And so we conclude that law belongs to reason. Indeed, in the opening of this chapter, the editor tells us, Thomas defines law as an ordinance of reason for the common good by one competent to make it and promulgate it. So law is of reason. It's bound not just the individual happiness of people, that eudaimonia, Aristotelian thing, personal happiness, but the common good, the larger common good of the common weal. And the person who has the authority to enact this law has authority to bind, to promulgate it, to make it known, right? To put it into order, into effect. Is law always ordered to the common good? Okay, why not? Give me some objections.
Gin fraud.
Jim Crow, very fallacious, awful law, separate but equal, separate water, it sounds like a bad law, right? Plessy versus Ferguson, okay. Why
Because,
no?
because we talked about, the colony is made up of people, and if you have a vicious people, then you have vicious colony. So they're the lawmakers as well. And you have ill-formed consciences, you have ill-formed laws.
Very fair. And I think he kind of says, so St. Thomas kind of like sidesteps this question. He answers that it should be. Whether it is or not, listen to what he says. I answer that law belongs to the source of human acts, since law is their rule and measure, and as reason is the source of human acts, so also is there in reason itself something that is the source of all other kinds of acts. And so law needs chiefly and especially to belong to this source. And the first source in practical matters with which practical reason is concerned is the ultimate end. This is the definition of teleology, right? Start with the end in mind. And the first source in practical matters is the ultimate end. The ultimate end of human life is happiness or blessedness, as I have maintained before. And so law especially needs to regard the order of things to blessedness. So perhaps Jim Crow is a fallacious law, not just because it's racist and prejudicial, and it is, but St. Thomas would say it doesn't help people attain eternal happiness. In fact, quite the opposite. It engenders hatred and division and whatever. And a lot of laws, like you said correctly, I agree with you, that are fallaciously designed, built upon flawed understandings of justice. He's going full Aristotle here. Aristotle, some people say, is the founding father of teleology, starting with end in mind. But for the Christian, right, the ultimate end isn't just kind of this, and I wouldn't call Aristotle's secular eudaimonia. It's a very anachronistic term, but it's not just kind of happiness here and now, it's eternal happiness. It's the beatific vision. So all just laws, if they are to be just, consider the common good in light of eternal blessedness. That is what he is saying. Okay. Okay. Is any person's reason competent to make law? I'm just going to go downtown Moscow, ask people to make laws. You guys are lawmakers now. Yeah. It's going to go downtown St. Louis, and just wrangle people up and just say, you're making laws for everyone. Everyone's reason is competent to make laws, yes or no? St. Thomas says, yeah. The apostle says in Romans 2:14 that when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do things that law prescribes, they make law for themselves. But we say the same about everyone. Therefore, anyone can make a law. That's what he says. Of course, you can probably tell now how these are his objections. He's going to say the opposite, right? As the philosopher says in Ethics, lawmakers aim to induce human beings to virtues. But any human being can lead others to virtue. Is that false? You're going to tell me that what human being is not made in the image and likeness of God? All human beings are equal in that way, right? Any human being can lead people to virtue. Therefore, the reason of any human being is competent to make law. St. Thomas. Or objection 3, as the ruler of a political community governs that community, so the head of a household governs his household. But the ruler of a political community can make laws regarding the political community. Therefore, any head of the household can make laws regarding his household. Anyone can make laws. His objections. Wait a second. On the contrary, laws and ordinance the people whereby elders and commoners together prescribe things. Therefore, not everyone's reason is competent to make law. There's a certain hierarchy. And I answer that in the strict sense primarily and chiefly regards the order of things to the common good. The law chiefly regards the order of things to the common good, the ultimate teleology of eternal blessedness. But ordering things to the common good belongs either to the whole people or to persons acting in the name of the whole people. And so lawmaking belongs either to the whole people or to a public personage who has the care of the whole people, for also in all other matters, ordering things to ends belongs to those to whom the ends belong. Wow, thanks, man. Talk about, that was sounding confusing enough.
Slightly different translation.
You do really. Read your translation.
Okay, so do you want me to read the whole?
Not the whole thing, just the end. Go for also in all other matters from that part, the last sentence. Because that's the question I want to ask you all after you read this.
And therefore, the making of a law belongs either to the whole people or to a public personage who has care of the whole people. Since in all other matters, the directing of anything to the end concerns him to whom the end belongs.
Okay, and once I mean,
Maybe it's not.
I think that seems pretty similar, yeah. But so, okay, on that point, thank you for reading that. Who is power vested in? crazy alt-right Catholic, monarchists are like, power doesn't come from the people. How dare you, President Biden says. I'm all about defending democracy. And you kind of neo-feudal monarchists say power comes from God.
Right.
And resides in God alone. I say it's from the people. I say, fraternity, equality, liberty, French revolutionary values, the people, who does authority belong to? What do you think? I mean, this is the great question I want to ask. Ordering things to ends belongs to those to whom the ends belong. Like, who has authority to make law? Thomas is saying not everyone gets to make law, to my great chagrin, because I was trying to round up a bunch of people to make laws. I want to make laws. I want to do law. I want to do jurisprudential things. I want to get elected to something and then do stuff. But I guess not everyone's allowed to do that. Whose power vested in? What do you all think?
Well, Christ tells us through Pilate where power comes from.
Right. That's brilliant. Exactly. I so much focus on that part when they have that dialogue in John 18 of, what is truth? But you would have no power unless it was given to you from above. Exactly. Right. So that's a great segue. His next question. I love this. This is so fun. Thomas Aquinas is so baller.
Yield to the mob out there.
Yeah, but what?
Trying to say that Christ had no guilt in him, but the mob.
Yes, I mean, exactly. No, and this is a very famous thing that it's a very famous long-standing debate over Pilate's guilt and whatever. His wife Claudia says, "I have this dream," right? And he's an innocent man. Dave's point stands, irrespective of that Christ is telling him, you have no power whatsoever. You're this earthly puppet, basically. You're this governor of Judea. That's cool. You wouldn't be that if God didn't decide to allow you to be that. God is the ordering agent of all things. What you should be doing is thanking God that you have this position and doing good with it, right? And teleologically ordering your small authority to the greater authority of God, and that true power is vested in the heavenly realm. Your point is, that he goes out there, right? And he wants to release Christ, but he's between a rock and a hard place, right? He's like, if I release Christ and then not Barabbas, the crowd is chanting, it's going to be this revolt. And that ends up happening in the year AD 70, the destruction of the temple. The people will revolt, but if a revolt happens, Caesar is going to have my head on a platter. He's between a rock and a hard place. And I'm not trying to I love Pilate. Pilate's innocent. I'm not theologically astute enough to even get so deep into this. It certainly seems that he had some sympathetic qualities and cowardice kind of mixed together. That you recognize the truth of Christ, but also chickened out and basically did the ultimate political thing. I wash my hands of this man's blood, right? It's not my deal. I'm passing the buck down the line. St. Thomas asked, is there an eternal law? He says, law signifies the direction to an end, but nothing ordered to an end is eternal, since only the ultimate end is eternal. No law is eternal. Thomas says there's no eternal law. Yeah? Or is there? Of course, it's an objection. Because on the contrary, Augustine says in his work on free choice, no one with intelligence can perceive the law called supreme reason not to be immutable, i.e. unchanging and eternal. I answer that, as I've said before, law is simply a dictate of practical reason by a ruler who governs a perfect community, but supposing that God's providence rules the world, his reason evidently governs the entire community of the universe. And so the plan of governance of the world existing in God as the ruler of the universe has the nature of law. And since God's reason conceives eternally, as Proverbs 8:23 says, not temporally, we need to say that such law is eternal.
Does he make conclusions at the end
That is his conclusion.
where he decides which one it is, or is it two objections?
No, I answer that as always his conclusion. So in this book,
Oh, okay, so his answer to the objections is
Yeah.
his conclusion.
exactly. So he starts off, he has three objections, then he writes on the contrary, exactly, and he reads into it. I answer that as his conclusion. It's so postmodern and awesome. I love this. We're going to talk about David Foster Wallace and Infinite Jest at the end of the semester. He says all things all. St. Thomas is the original David Foster Wallace, putting his answer in the middle because that's awesome. He really an architecture piece. So cool. It's three objections. On the contrary, then his conclusion, and then he goes back and replies to three objections. So really ties in the screw. Okay. So actually, let's do this right now. So remember, his objection 3 was law signifies the direction to an end. Only the ultimate is eternal. No law is eternal. So after he said that he believes in eternal law, he goes back and says, reply to objection 3, Law signifies actively ordering things to an end, namely that law orders things to an end. And he talks about, it goes on for a long time, and then the ruler's law also needs to be ordered to that extrinsic end, but the end of God's governance is God himself. And his law is indistinguishable from himself. And so the eternal law is not ordered to another end. So he goes back, he's so tight, like he's so clean, Mr. Clean scrub style of like no particles are left unspoken. 3 objections, and those are at the end and responded to, but in the middle is that awesome, like his point. So I'm going to be basically reading mainly that I answer that sections here. Are there human laws? And so also Cicero says in his rhetoric, human law originally sprang from nature, then things become customs because their rational benefit and fear and reverence for law validated things that both sprang from nature and were approved by custom. Yes, there's human law. There's obviously human law, he says. Okay, 4th article. Did human beings need a divine law? What are your thoughts? Is divine law necessary for human beings? Or why we're just rational animals, some people say. Focus on animal. Why do we need divine law? Do we need divine law?
Maybe because we have a creator, we need divine law.
Yeah, my earlier point about the AMA question about atheism. What can atheists do that Christians can't? They do everything except that first thing, to love God above all, like the justice. The Ciceronian give God his due justice of worshiping God. So the fact, the reality of having creator therefore implies, and if he is the one who holds all things by his providential care in place, requires response to divine law. Okay. He says yes. He says that we need divine law. I answer that in addition to natural and human laws, divine law was necessary to give direction to human life. There are 4 reasons. First, law directs our acts in relation to our ultimate end. He says the first reason for divine law, it directs us to that ultimate teleological goal, teleological and theological, of eternal blessedness. Second, the problem is there's an uncertainty in human judgment. Would you not agree? We need divine law. Let's talk about divine law as the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. We need God to say, no, this is the objective reality, because some people will be like, no, actually you can commit genocide against these people, or you can do this, or you guys can't do it, but I'm allowed to, I'm special. So number 1, we need divine law because ordering us towards our final end. Number 2, because human judgment is uncertain. Third, human beings can make laws regarding things they are able to judge. And human beings can judge only sensibly perceptible external acts, not hidden internal movements. God alone can see the true motivation of someone, that why lying beneath the surface of why people act the way they do. Hence why don't judge people, right? My next Hippo lecture in 3 weeks is going to be called Judge Not Lest You Be Judged. It's going to be so good. And it's like, right, like this guy's a scumbag, this guy's a scumbag, this guy's like that kind of attitude of all of us do. It's like, you have no idea. He might actually be a saint. You can't see what's going on inside. Or vice versa. Like if someone said like, oh, this person engaged in prostitution, right? I mean, of course, I'd be scandalized. I think all of us would be. That's a bad life choice. What I'm saying is God alone can understand every reason for that decision and whatever. And it might actually in that case be, I mean, I think anyone would say with pure plumber's logic, it's always objectively bad. There could be so many mitigating factors that our judgment would be so wrong, like condemning this person. They're so evil. I would never do that. Like, so we need divine law because only God can see what's actually going on in our hearts and souls. 4th, human laws cannot punish or prohibit all evil deeds. Remember last class, we discussed that actually later in the book. Is it in the state's interest to punish all vice? No, Aquinas says. Human laws cannot punish or prohibit all evil deeds, as Augustine says in the work on free choice. This is because in seeking to eliminate all evils, one would thereby also take away many human goods and not benefit the common good necessary for human companionship. Here Aquinas foresaw World Economic Forum, let's all be bots. Let's all be AI bots. We're going to eliminate crime and stuff by lobotomizing you, making you a robot. And people talk about some of these one world people want to make cars that drive themselves that only go on prescribed paths. Well, that's great. I'm all for that because we're not going to have car accidents anymore, or whatever, but that's going to be really, that's a prison, right? So he's basically saying you could try to create a more virtuous society by just denying all the kind of free will. Biden has been calling me a lot recently. He wants me to get involved in this energy commission. I'll call him back later.
Yeah,
They're earful.
I'll give him an earful. I'll tell him Brad King is not happy with how you're governing the country.
another that comes to mind as you put this out is human law is ever changing depending on conditions and the times. Whereas God's law, as we said earlier, is eternal, it doesn't change.
Yeah, yeah, and like, I think we need that, like. Plato talked about that, you know, every human desire must have a fulfillment, and that the reason why. And I'll say that in the talk tonight, that's a way better ringtone than mine. That's Mayberry, Andy Griffith.
Why didn't we get a hold of you?
Biden's on, Biden's like, get a hold of Chris Schmidt.
That's a theme song too.
That's Andy Griffith show. Andy Griffith show, yeah.
Probably.
Guys, can you imagine, okay, that song starting off like that, and then it dropping into like a tech house techno mix? Like, that was so, that would be really great. Someone did a hip hop remix of Glenn Miller's Chattanooga Choo Choo. Anyone ever hear Chattanooga Choo Choo? That's on?
Yes, yes.
Correct. What do you care?
I'm gonna play it right now.
Isn't that good reality?
It's Glenn Miller.
I'm fun.
Okay.
Seems that one should make.
When you get your next big
This is
idea,
not the techno remix, Sally. Just imagine this remix from the rap. It was. Okay, so it leads into this. It leads. The guy's voice is low. It sounds like he's so much. It sounds like he's in this CEO. Listen.
What you say? Step aside, partner. It's my day. Bend an ear and listen to my version. Pardon me, boy. Is that the Chattanooga Choo Choo? Yeah. Or you can give me a shine. Got my fare.
Anyways, a guy remade that song into a rap song. It was really great.
Back in the end, it was clarinet shredded.
There you go. Guys, St. Thomas Aquinas / Glenn Miller. Is there only one divine law? What does Aquinas say? Oh man, this is controversial, right? What does St. Thomas Aquinas say about God's, promulgation, divine lawgiver of the old law and the new covenant and the relationship between the Jewish people and Christians? Ooh, right? This is a good controversial topic. You hear this kind of thing, that dual covenant theology and all this kind of stuff. What does Aquinas say? Is there two laws, one law? What do you think? Okay.
Yeah, it seems like the first two.
Well, no. So I see where you're going with that. Don't misunderstand it, right? Exactly. Those would be those commandments, right? And Christ says are the law and the prophets in Matthew 22 and then Mark 12, and worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices, to love God above all and love your neighbor. But that would be, there's two stipulations that sum up the whole law. But he says here, there are two divine laws, namely the old law and the new law. But he says this. And so the apostle in Galatians 3:24-25, St. Paul, compares the condition of the old law to that of a child subject to a tutor, and the condition of the new law to an adult no longer subject to a tutor. And we note the perfection and imperfection of the two laws by three things belonging to the divine laws, as I've said before. For in the first place, it belongs to any law to be directed to the common good, as its end, as I have said before. Yeah, you said this before a million times. I love Aquinas' how repetitive he is, like hammered home. Hey, you guys are so dumb. You're not going to give this. I'm being totally sincere. I love that. As I've said many times, law is about directing the common good to its ultimate end, right? And this common good can be of two kinds. It may be a sensibly perceptible and earthly good, and the old law was directly ordered to such a good. Old law was directed to an earthly good. So the people were invited at the very institution of the old law to occupy the earthly kingdom of the Canaanites. Or the common good may be an intelligible and heavenly good, and the new law orders human beings to such a good. And so Christ, at the very outset of his preaching, inviting human beings to the kingdom of heaven, saying, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so Augustine says in his work against Faustus that, quote, the Old Testament contains promises of temporal things, and so is called old, but the promise of eternal life belongs to the New Testament. And indeed, all of the old, that's the whole argument of Christianity, is that Christ is the Jewish and universal Messiah, and that people like, one of my favorite Old Testament books, the book Isaiah, right? The prophet Isaiah, he was eagerly anticipating the coming of the Messiah. That the whole point was the fulfillment of the old law in the coming of, the son of David, the son of God. Finally, he says here, third, it belongs to the divine law to induce human beings to observe the commandments. And the old law indeed accomplished this by fear of punishments, while the new law accomplishes this by love, which the grace of Christ foreshadowed in the old law, conferred the new law, pours into our hearts. It'd be a great question. People ask, like, why were the Old Testament people so brutal? Why is God ordering, Moses hold his hands up while the enemy is slaughtered? Kind of, well, maybe, we thank you, Adam and Eve. In our fall, the fall is so bad, we're extremely barbaric, and our salvation is slowly won, working to Christ. And so the old law, all the 623, propositions, etc., in the Torah are beautiful and holy things. And the 10 Commandments, I still think, is one of the greatest things of all time. I saw someone I hate bumper stickers, but someone had a bumper sticker was like 10 Commandments, 3,500 years old, is still relevant. And I wholly agree. If people followed the 10 Commandments, life society would be great. People really didn't covet, didn't kill, didn't commit adultery, put God first. I mean, that honored their parents and by extension, all authority and family. Oh my gosh, it's great. But it's like, maybe that's an answer because we didn't deserve yet the law of love that comes in Christ, that kind of true universal fellowship that the atheists then take and run with and want to have, Christianity minus Christ. And all the modern virtues and wokeness are just Christian heresies, right? I'm going to just love to the max and be only mercy. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, that kind of stuff. Like everything revolves around this. In fact, G.K. Chesterton said that, never forget that. He's like, all the vices of modern society are just virtues in excess. All the Protestants, people who have a good idea about like loving people and take it to an extreme, a good idea about being tolerant, take it to an extreme where your head falls off, where it's like just you're tolerating bad stuff and whatever, but it has a good intention. All right, so man, we are ladling lots and lots of maple syrup today. We are ladling it, ladling it with a ladle. Big Dipper, Constellation, and that's why I named my large ladle for my maple syrup. Is the effect of law to make human beings good? Or if the aim of the lawmaker strives for real good, that is the common good regulated by divine justice, law consequently makes human beings absolutely good. That's his answer. Do you agree? You guys agree with St. Thomas? I hate the term. I want to like punch myself in the face repeatedly when I hear this term. Hot take. I hate that. I despise that. This is a hot take. Like, put your hot take. This is a controversial thing.
Hot cake?
Not hot cake, hot take, T. HOTTAKE. Take. A hot take on a subject. Hot take, yeah. Yeah. So like, no, I just despise that. It's like, oh, it's so controversial, but okay, Aquinas is saying something perhaps controversial here. The common good regulated by divine justice. Therefore, law consequently makes human beings absolutely good. Is the law sufficient if it's infused by grace to make us absolutely good? Or St. Paul seems to say throughout the New Testament, if you're really good, you're free from the law. You are no longer under the dictates of law, right? What do you all think? Let's get our plumbers.
Is he comparing? You're free
I am.
from human law.
I'm comparing. The comparison is mine. So you're welcome to totally discard it. Let's just focus on what he said. Common good regulated by divine justice. It's therefore law consequently makes human beings absolutely good. Do you think that's true?
The law doesn't make anyone good at that. Your individual act.
Okay.
Well, if he's referring to the highest tier of law, that is true, because he's referring to God's order for the universe, and if we act in accordance with God's order, if we act in order with that, we're inherently not sinning because we're doing all of God's will. So it means we are good.
Okay.
It by nature, it doesn't admit of any wrongdoing.
Okay, fair enough.
Can you do a good thing without good intention?
You tell me. That was the question last class. Yeah, he said no. Aquinas last class said despite the fact, if you build a hospital and you're only doing it to score political points or virtue signal, despite the fact that hospital helps people, you don't receive like credit for it, like grace. God is not going to be happy with that. You must have charity in all you do. So what do you think? Do you think?
So I would say, yes, the law is there to make good as it is for the common good, for divine law, so long as one is doing the law with right intention, which I think is a premise that he's not stating specifically.
Which I would say that is part of the divine law, is
Yeah.
to do things with the right intention.
Yeah, like doing it not just because it's the law, but doing it.
Out of love. And I think I love that distinction once more of imperfect and perfect contrition. Both are sufficient for forgiveness to receive
So
absolution.
a parent tells his little kid who gets up from dinner, hey, push your chair, and they got to push your chair back on the table. They're okay. So is that not a good?
Well, I think Christ addresses this, and ultimately, I don't mean to sound so Protestant, but it's bad that Protestants have co-opted this. Everything is Catholic, everything is, one true Christian unity. May God grant us one day perfect unity as Christians. But Christ's words in the gospel, I mean, that's the ultimate source. He gives that great parable. The one son who says, yeah, dad, I'll go work in the vineyard, and doesn't. And the second one grumbles and does. And Christ says the second one did his father's will. So Christ kind of answers, I think, against St. Thomas here. It's always, St. Thomas is awesome. And Christ says, you've written well of me, and you're amazing. Always Christ over everyone. Christ seems to say, there's this imperfect contrition value. I'm only sorry for my sins because I don't want to go to hell. I'm still forgiven. I only pushed in the chair, whatever, dad. I still did what you wanted me to do. I still obeyed you. I should not act in disrespect towards you and do it willingly out of love. But I think Christ says in the gospel, there is still some merit there against what St. Thomas has been saying. When Christ says again, right? The one son, his heart was in the right place. I will of course do it, daddy. Yes. Oh, thanks for giving me this task. I want to make you proud. And he doesn't do it. That guy's epic fail. Where the other guy's like, get out of here, dad, go do ball, whatever. He grumbles and he goes, does it. Christ says, but the second guy, he did his father's will, period. And what does he say in Matthew 7:21? Not all who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, those who do my father's will. At the end of chapter 12, verse 50, when your family's outside, who's my family? Those who do my father's will. So the second guy is blessed, even though he was grumbling. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Well, part of that is even under the old law, what was neat, what got people to salvation was participation in the law. And then they were redeemed by Christ's sacrifice and time. And that was like being perfectly obedient to the law, even with bad intentions, as under the Old Testament, wasn't enough.
Still had merit. Yeah.
I mean, it was enough to prepare you for Christ's sacrifice.
Right,
It wasn't enough by itself.
And perhaps that's a genius. Let's perhaps avoid the trap. If I can't do with perfect love, I'm not going to do it at all. No, I'd still rather the scumbag oligarch build the hospital because it helps people. I can't muster it in my heart to do this with charity, so I'm just not going to do it. I'd want him, maybe his act would build on leading him towards a charitable expression of that. Well, now I see these kids being helped and my heart melts, and Lord have mercy on me. And I see now why this is a good thing to do, where before I was just doing it for political points.
So as we head into tax season here, bring this down.
My mother's an accountant.
FYI.
FYI, my mom's an accountant.
If I pay my taxes, if we pay our taxes only because we want to avoid jail. That's
Imperfect contrition, yeah.
One approach versus, we're paying our taxes because Christ said it.
And because you love President Joseph Robinette Biden.
Well, because give to Biden, give to Caesar.
Give the Caesar Biden, yeah.
What is his, and then similar in between is what do you mean it's his? I'm
Right.
not quite catching that to begin with.
How would you guys compare Biden to Julius Caesar, Hadrian, and Trump? How do those four emperors compare?
I always have more hair.
Wow, that seems like an accident. That seems like an accident. Guys, we have Caesar what?
That is own coin.
That's pretty cool. Biden doesn't have crypto coin as far as the Biden coin.
Trump does.
Can't coin very soon for Biden either.
You don't think so?
Caesar donated. Caesar donated his gardens to people upon his death, and I don't think that Joe Biden's going to do that, so.
Time will tell. Time will tell. Guys, we have 3 minutes left.
Very soon.
I'm not gonna lie, this has been one of our most like absolutely dense lectures. I'm actually grateful to the Schmitz, they're leaving early today, so we'll finish the class at 9:20, like I said, in 3 minutes. Because this has been such a very dense class, and it's like, we spent the last 50 minutes like totally on topic, minus Glenn Miller chatting if you. So let me just read a couple of things. You've spoken enough. Thank you always sincerely for your wonderful participation. Thank you for such a full class today. It's beautiful. Thank you. He asks, is the eternal law a supreme plan in God? And then he goes full plumber. Here he says, I answer that as there pre-exists in every craftsman, blue collar guy, plan for the things produced by his skill. So also there needs to exist in every ruler an orderly plan for things his subjects ought to do. Indeed, if the trades require training and apprenticeship, why do you think moral law wouldn't? So the eternal law is simply the plan of divine wisdom that directs all the actions and movements of created things. Do we all know the eternal law? Therefore, we should say no one except the blessed who see God by his essence can know the eternal law as it is in itself. But every rational creature knows it in some of its radiating effects, whether greater or lesser effects. So I'm going to stop there and let me just conclude on that. He basically says, right, through the eyes of faith in grace, being part of, Christ as the motive power, and especially those who have already passed through this valley of tears and see Christ as he is, behold the beatific vision in heaven, possess the eternal law in its fullness. In heaven, we are taught we will see God as he is, face to face. That is the ultimate happiness, right, for all eternity. But he says, even us benighted sinners, poor sinners, see, plumber's logic, by the radiating effects, the cause and effects of this world, the certain laws and how they, interplay and that kind of stuff. So in a sense, no one has an excuse, no one can cop out. If you are not even a person of faith, may God grant you the grace to become one by your simple use of reason, no matter how clouded and darkened and fog covered it is, as we have today on the Palouse. You still can know what is right and wrong. That's a final thing that I'll conclude. I remember Fulton J. Sheen, the venerable Fulton J. Sheen, gave a great talk, and all of his talks are wonderful. But he was talking about some young woman had stolen from, she was working at some New York hotel, and she had stolen money. And her defense later was, I didn't know stealing was wrong. And it kind of held up in court. Sad. This is actually 1950. This is before the 60s Cultural Revolution. Like that, there are some people claiming, like, I just wasn't like. It's like, no, you have an eternal law. Stop. Everyone knows it's wrong to take what is not yours, even if you're going full Robin Hood and like this is a rich oligarch. Like, so that is what Aquinas is saying here. Let's finish today's class. Let's pause. We're about halfway done. We'll probably finish this next class. Like I said, Sam, next Wednesday, we'll finish Aquinas with some great questions, a lot of fun debate. But let's pause there and say his ultimate argument for rationality and Plummer's logic is everyone has access to this. This is not, Christ denounces his critics saying, have I not taught openly? Show me where I've erred. I taught in the synagogue. I don't do esoteric hidden knowledge, right? And that is what Aquinas is saying too, why we should love him so much. Is he's like, this is accessible to everyone. You can have a 60 IQ or a 300 IQ, educated, not educated, a person of faith or not. Everyone through the light of reason, even when it's clouded, has access to truth, to good, and can know what is right and wrong. God bless you all. Father, would you be so kind as to finish us in prayer as always, if you don't mind?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God our Father, we thank you for the gift of the new day, for the gift of life and health, for the gift of human wisdom and of inventive skill. Help us to know your will and give us the grace to live them out in our daily lives through Christ our Lord. Amen. The Lord be with you. Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Please note tonight too, I said already, but we have Spirit and Life. And what's going to be super fun and appropriate about it is it's about the scholastics in St. Thomas. So we've done 4 classes. It's going to be more of this. So, but different angle and stuff. Some things we will be repeating, but it should be very, very fun. So hope to see you there tonight.